Good morning and a very warm welcome to all speakers, delegates present over here for this session on nuclear resilience and the role of SMR for the net zero power systems as part of India Smart Utility Week 2025. It is my great honor to invite Chair and Moderator for this session, Mr. Ganapati Myneni. He is a co-founder BSCE Systems USA and Professor of Science, Geetham University, Visakhapatnam, India. Welcome, sir. Welcome, sir. I would like to invite speakers for this session, starting with Mr. Andrew Paterson, Senior Fellow, US Nuclear Industry Council and Board Member, Environmental Business International. Welcome, sir. Now may I invite Mr. Timothy L. Head. He is the Assistant Director at Next Lab, USA. Welcome, sir. I would like to invite Mr. Kailash Mittal, BSCE Bharat Ltd. Welcome, sir. I would like to invite Mr. Everett Redmond. He is a Senior Director, Federal Affairs, Oklo Inc. Welcome, sir. I would like to invite Mr. Akira Yamamoto. He is a Senior Scientist and Professor, Acceleratory Laboratory, KEK, Japan. He will be joining virtually.
Thank you.
May I invite Mr. Manoj Upadhyaya, Deputy Advisor, Energy, NITI Aayog. He will be joining later at 11 o'clock. May I invite Mr. Thierry Advocat, Nuclear Counselor and Embassy of France in India. Welcome, sir. I would like to invite Mr. Chandra Tiwari. He is a Head Business Development Services and Technology, Tata Power Company Limited. Welcome, sir. I would like to invite Mr. Arnada Prasad. He is a General Manager and Head at Nuclear Engineering, NTPC. Welcome, sir. Welcome you all for this session. I am handing over this session to moderator to take forward this session for further discussions.
Good morning, dear friends, and we welcome you to this exciting session. And this will be the future of, I think, the world, nuclear energy, which can provide clean air and water. That's my passion, is to provide clean air and water for all our fellow citizens of the world. And nuclear energy is the only way, I believe. And thank you for all the panel members to kindly accept our invitation and to be here. Let us start. I would like to have my view graph. The only view graph I will use for my presentation is going to be kind of a philosophical scientific, which will be coming up here shortly. And BSCE stands for it's a small acronym for Brahma Shakti Clean Energy Systems. So all that can be seen from this is the ancient wisdom of Hindu philosophy that is shown here. Brahma is sitting on the lotus here, which is the color you can see of the lotus, and that matches very well with the theme of this conference. They have the same colors here. It looks like coincidence. There are a lot of coincidences in our life. So this is how I would like to see. We all know as a scientist that atomic hydrogen is the basis of everything in the universe. And the hydrogen pervades the universe with about 99.5%. I'm not sure about that figure, but anyway, so Mahavishnu, who is predicted lying on Adisesha here, which is with his consort Mahalakshmi sitting on the orbitals. This you can see as a proton and electron, and Adisesha is the energy field of the atomic hydrogen. So we are hydrogenoids, obviously. So if we want to see any of our organs are in trouble, we go and put our bodies in MRI. So we excite the protons, and as they decay down, that gives the information about how our systems are working or not. So, and Lakshmi is prayed by everyone in India here to give the wealth. She is the provider of wealth. So how can you connect that with the modern science? All the light we have, flow of electrons, is energy. Without the flow of electrons, our economies don't exist. We have to go back to our ancient times. That's the way I see it. And then a neutron is attached to the proton, as you see it. Brahma I consider as a neutron. This is my way of thinking about science, how it is. And that is a neutron. And the energy that we get from sun is due to fusion of hydrogen and deuterium. So we are living, our lives are supported by Mahavishnu. So that is very obvious. For here, I think if you want to really propagate nuclear energy without opposition, I think we have to start thinking about in these terms that are known for millennia. So people shouldn't be afraid of, nuclear at all, because we are all nuclear in a way, because we are full of protons, and all the energy communications in our body is through electron, Mahalakshmi. Any flow of current is associated with the flow of electrons. So that's what I think we need to spread this message in the world so that we can educate people in a way that they are not afraid of nuclear. This is created by vested interest from my point of view, and I think we have to sensibly educate the people so that nuclear energy can be implemented throughout the world that will provide clean air and water and the rest. So the way I see it, I think this is my opening remarks for the session, and I would like to invite my friend from Virginia, Andrew Paterson, to start the first talk.
How do I switch to my slides? Okay. How do I put my deck up? Okay, here we go. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Ganapati. Thank you for assembling what I have found to be a very wise, beyond their years team in this panel to answer your opening quote. The nuclear resurgence is upon us. And so what I would like to do is set the table for a dialogue, which is, I think, what we need. Not just between our two countries, but really the whole planet. And I think this is one of your ambitions, rightfully so. My background coming from the Nuclear Industry Council includes 10 years at the Department of Energy Framing Policy and a lot of work with the financial community, which is going to be the key to answering the challenge put forward by Prime Minister Modi, I assert. Where is the money going to come from? How will that be negotiated is a global issue, not just an issue for India. So together, I think we can help solve that problem. Alone, we cannot. So that's part of the reason that I'm here. Let me start then by highlighting what I noted from the head of IAEA, Ganapati, Dr. Rafael Grossi. So he said in December, in part because of some election results, that we are now facing the rise of realism in the discussion of energy transition. And this is being faced by governments individually and by our planet as a collective. So what Rafael Grossi, who talks to every single nuclear country, said just a few months ago, we are witnessing what I call a return to realism in energy policy as nations face the urgent need to decarbonize, but he did not stop there. to strengthen energy security and ensure sustainable growth, nuclear is uniquely positioned to meet all these challenges. And so what I want to do today is set the table for what Master Grossi described, but also open some channels for dialogue, for getting to common solutions between the US and our allies and India. So we were given the title Nuclear Resurgence and the Role of SMRs for Reliable Net Zero Power Systems. That's the challenge. Some of my comments are based on our briefing to the US Nuclear Caucus in the House of Representatives, which Ganapati and I were fortunately featured at. And so some of the content is what we briefed the US Congress about. The two maps are at the top, the nuclear reactors in the world as they are today, and then on the bottom, urban population density. So one of the main themes I want to make today in my slides is nuclear is for urban demand, not for rural energy poverty alleviation. Nuclear is fundamentally dense for dense urban loads. It's one of my main themes. In fact, I assert that nuclear energy enables clean urban living, which is why it's going to be so important in India, which is why the Prime Minister, I think, took time to put forward a bold ambition of 100 gigawatts. How is he going to do that? How are we, more importantly, going to do that? So tripling nuclear was a headline a year and a half ago at the COP28 meeting, now referred to as the nuclear COP. It will take 1,000 gigawatts to get there. And now India has proposed 100 gigawatts of that. There's plenty of capital. I want to make that assertion. $300 trillion circles the globe every day. There's plenty of money, but it's not in national budgets. That's going to be one of the challenges. My second big theme, as I mentioned, is that nuclear energy is the only source that will really be able to take on the challenge of 6 billion people in cities by 2050. That's a doubling from 2010. India is at the center of that challenge. The US and Europe are not. Because you see the population growth, you see the density, you see the challenges that come with that. So India must be on the front lines of the solution, I assert. So the challenge is, how do we mobilize capital to meet that challenge? One of my other major themes I want to leave you with today is that the energy transitions we face, therefore, because of the 6 billion people, are exponential in nature. That's the nature of the challenge, including, Dr. Myneni, the challenge of clean air and clean water, not just building nuclear plants. Governments are inherently incremental. You cannot take on this challenge with just a national budget. And so we're all struggling with that. So you cannot, the US cannot, fund what's needed for this challenge from your national budget alone. And the nature of how governments participate in the financing of new nuclear will shift. It will increasingly call upon public-private partnership investments. And then another theme I'm going to lay out here is, so therefore, who are the superpowers going forward that are going to really meet this challenge? And I assert that the US and India are two, not the only superpowers, but I'm going to explain, I think, why India is a superpower in facing this challenge. The last major theme that I'm going to address, and that Everett and some of the other panelists, Tim, will talk about, is that now, in the last year, I would say, the data center AI revolution is totally changing the demand picture and therefore opportunities for finance. So I want to hear what each of the panelists has to say about that, because I think that's a dramatic new factor in the future of the energy transition that's going to enable financing. So those are my 4 major themes at the outset. Here's the tripling of nuclear announcement at COP28. 24 countries, 6 more have signed on, and then just in the last couple of months, major corporations, Everett, you're involved with a couple of them at least, have also gotten involved in this pledge. So it involves $5 trillion in financing to meet this auspicious, ambitious goal. The money is there. The money is there in the global capital markets. It is not in national budgets. Okay? So just funding this revolution out of national budgets will be totally inadequate. Here's the challenge I talked about, where the city boom is going to be. Again, I want to repeat. This is an exponential challenge. It's not an incremental challenge. India is on the forefront of this. And so nuclear is going to be critical to this because it offers always-on electricity, 0 emissions, in a very small footprint, particularly compared to wind. Very, very important. So you see here some examples more of you are familiar with. In Sao Paulo, I asked my Brazilian friends, where do you put the wind and the solar? Brazil is trying to explore nuclear. Tokyo has restarted 12 reactors out of their 33 gigawatts despite Fukushima. Why? Mega cities use millions of clean, reliable megawatt hours. They cannot be powered just by wind and solar. Tokyo, Seoul, Mumbai, New York City. Not just the cost of electricity needs to be considered. What is the cost of being without electricity in megacities? It can reach the billions in cost of outages. It isn't discussed as a cost. It needs to be. What is the cost of outage? Now, my good friend, Dr. Myneni is going to talk about Thorcon at some point. Thorcon is well positioned potentially for coastal cities, and 60% of the planet lives near the coast. So that can be part of addressing the solution. It's a format. IAEA chimed in with their forecast, a low forecast and a high forecast. And so what we're seeing is a debate emerging. I was at the SMR conference in Vienna at the IAEA in October. They expected 400, Dr. Myneni. IAEA in Vienna got 1,200. The interest level is sky high. I don't know if you were there, Everett, but yeah, that's right. Yeah. So we were very pleasantly surprised by the turnout of the first SMR conference last October. So even in the low case, we're going to have to replace 300 gigawatts, but more likely we're going to need to build 1,000 gigawatts with India 100 of that, just to put it in perspective. Here are the data center AI announcements. Oklo, Everett has been part of this just in the last 12 months, calling for dramatic increases in electricity demand. All of the utilities in the United States are rejiggering their forecasts and struggling with how to bring on this much power. Nuclear SMRs are going to be part of the solution with gas as a ramp, and all of those approaches are being explored here in India because India is an infotech superpower, I assert. So this challenge is for India also. Why do I keep coming back to the point that these challenges are exponential in nature? Because the technology adoption curves in our history as societies occurs exponentially. Automobiles, computers, cell phones, air conditioning, plasma television sets, they do not occur incrementally. I assert, and Everett, Tim, the others, you guys can speak more to this, that I believe we're entering an S-curve now for SMRs. And it's the exponential nature of the challenge, and what Geoffrey Moore put forward in 1991 with his Crossing the Chasm analysis, is that adoption of these new technologies does not occur incrementally. They're on the right-hand side there. There are innovators, Tim and Everett on this panel, Neward, Thierry with France would be in the innovator class, Thorcon certainly in the innovator class. Then you have early adopters, then you have more of an early main customer group, or late majority, and then laggards. The point is that the adoption of these technologies occurs exponentially, so that it cannot fundamentally be financed by national governments. You have to tap the private capital markets. Now, back in October when they had the annual IMF meeting, this is a central point to the entire challenge. The chief of the IMF, Georgieva, said, "We are entering a period of stressed sovereigns." This is the head of the IMF. She sees it all. Last October. Most governments in the world today, Norway is the one exception I can think of, are facing severe strain on their national budgets coming out of COVID, going into a more challenging global situation with some disruptions in trade and whatnot. So sovereigns are fundamentally stressed. They have a role to play, that's for sure. But you cannot get there using just your national budget. You have to be able to tap the private markets. And so tripling nuclear capacity, or in the case of India, going to 100 gigawatts by 2050 with only public finance is impossible. Now, fortunately, the Prime Minister visited the White House last month and put forward his own, I thought it was actually clever, formula of MAGA plus MEGA, make India great again, equals MEGA, a partnership for prosperity. Now, people treated it with chuckles, and it was cute and clever and whatnot, but I think he's on to something, and I'm going to explain why. So the US and India are committed to an energy security partnership, and I'm going to assert that nuclear must be in it. India believes that also. So I want to come back to this model because the Prime Minister and our President have put it forward. Let's take a look. So part of the energy partnership, will be basic fossil exports from the US to India. India, USA, mega opportunity for energy security. Same thing with natural gas and LNG. MAGA, MEGA, mega opportunity. And I assert there's going to be one in nuclear. Now, the announcement, and I want to hear the Indian side of this, Ganapati, was in February for 100 reactors, and how much is in the purse? Need more. Terry, I think the same's true in France. The same is true in the USA. So where are we going to get it from? So Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, she faces this challenge, plus the goal of commercializing SMRs. Now, for those of you concerned about safety, and for the panel, I'm going to say I dealt with the safety issue with this slide. Okay? So what is fascinating is if you look at Fukushima, even Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, TMI, all three still use nuclear. All three.
So most people don't know this, but you see the steam coming off of the 3 Mile Island there? Why? Because the other reactor ran for 40 years. Safely. Because Pennsylvania wanted the always-on, zero emission on a small footprint. Tonight, Ukraine will still rely on its reactors for half of its power. Half. And then Japan, as I mentioned, has restarted 12 of their 33 gigawatts of reactor capacity. So not planning to has restarted in the land of Fukushima because they need it to keep their cities running. Now, the major reason is that nuclear energy enables clean urban living, as I've said. And last night, how many of you saw this announcement? President Trump is offering U.S. ownership of Ukraine's nuclear plants as part of a energy security thrust. Just last night. I don't know if that's going to happen, but the point to take home is that there are going to be different structures for doing things. The old 20th century models are fracturing. Now, in the case of France, Thierry, you already do this in the UK. In 2008, EDF bought British Energy. So France operates the entire nuclear platform for the UK. There is a model. So I put that forward as an opportunity. So this just summarizes why are we here. I've gone through all of these points, but the one I want to add is that the great game is shifting. The geopolitics of nuclear now needs to be taken into account. It's not just a matter of the cost of electricity. Russia and China, as two prominent examples, use nuclear power plants in their foreign policy. That's how they won the project in Egypt, in Turkey, even in Kundankulam here. So it's a foreign policy thrust from Rosatom. India did the same in Pakistan. And so now what we're going to see with the advent, I assert, of the data centers and AI is a much stronger tilt toward commercial and industrial applications in getting nuclear capacity deployed. And each of the panelists, I think, will address that. The other thing I wanted to point out is that you really need to think at the city level, not just at the country level, when you're talking about nuclear. And so some of the best off-takers, users for nuclear are going to be the cities, and this came up in the Mayor's Forum on Climate Change. So cities need to always be on the table, not just countries. Here's another example of exponential change. So the advent of electric vehicles, however it unfolds, will not be incremental. The technology adoption of electric vehicles will be exponential. And that's going to cause a greater need for nuclear. Otherwise, you won't be able to charge your car overnight or your bus. So there's some tactical observations here. India cannot build 100 gigawatts alone, I'm asserting. And so the question on the table, Ganapati, is can India share control and ownership to gain financing? If you gain financing, if you put forward a nuclear state monopoly as your only model, I assure you, you will not gain financing from the global capital markets. So India is going to have to adopt new structures in order to finance nuclear, and I think that the industrial applications at data centers, and Everett and Tim are going to talk about that, provide a way forward, I assert. Now, I tried this out, this is more to my panel, I tried this out with some urban planners I spoke to recently, because they're struggling with why nuclear. None of them are physicists. And I told them, because you get to multiply any mass change by the speed of light squared, which is a big number. It's 90 quadrillion. What other energy form gives you an exponential gain in energy? Only nuclear. That's why it's best suited for urban energy demand that's facing an exponential shift to 6 billion people. Do you want to power this in Mumbai with these at night? It's not going to happen. Pollution is another issue that Ganapati highlighted, right? So I'm going to flip it around. Air and water pollution in India, Ganapati, for 1.4 billion people is so severe that it provides the world's largest opportunity for nuclear energy. How else can I reframe it? Most of that is you're still burning coal, which needs to be replaced by nuclear. Okay, that's possible. Here's the air index I looked up before arriving in Delhi. More opportunity. Cleaning up the Ganges River for 40% of India's people. I assert that this will require exponential levels of energy, not incremental. And you won't be able to do it from your national budget. You're going to have to do this with international partnerships. So then, I put this forward for your consideration. Who are the superpowers? Who are the superpowers? So China and India, clearly in terms of what's coming in energy consumption, you can see how flatlined US and OECD Europe is. Africa is coming along at a lower level. But China and India are emerging as the superpowers for energy consumption. How are you going to do it? Well, science and engineering graduates, or STEM, science and technology and engineering grads. So India now, combined with the United States, for the first time, surpasses China. For the first time last year. The advantage in India, obviously, is English speaking versus China. And there are now more than 330,000 Indian international students in the US. For the first time, it's more than China. So I'm asserting that India is a superpower for brain power. It's a natural ally for the United States, and Europe for that matter. But this is a breakthrough, I assert, in terms of the brain power we're going to need to solve the challenge. So I was very pleased to see Prime Minister Modi with President Trump offering this capacity that India brings to the party. STEM graduates. India is a superpower. That's what we need to solve the problem. India's planning new nuclear. It's a robust schedule. You're going to need lots of engineers. But here's the current rack-up. So a lot of these are all large reactors being built, 58 gigawatts. And I shared this with my American friends. We're getting our tails kicked by Russia and China, is what I told my American friends. I can do that. So they have a dominant position in the currently under construction, but Everett and Tim, we're now going to shift to SMRs, and I assert that's where the US can regain advantage. And partnering with Thorcon and maybe even the French, Terry, in terms of Newark. So our basic aim is to get to fleets sooner and pursue an allied model for financing, not a national budget model for financing. I'm going to come back to this, Ganapati. This is my answers to the homework that we were given. This is where we came from, so you have this in the homework assignment, when the reactors were built, and you can see once again that the history is not incremental. There were waves of new nuclear, which I think we're facing now. Chemicals is going to be one of the areas. I want to hear what Everett and Tim say about this. Here's our rack up of the SMR projects. It's totaling more than 85 billion in total value. That's a low end. I haven't seen the weekly announcements from Oklo yet, Everett, so maybe it's going to be more than this. Thorcon is in the sweepstakes, a larger entry. And here's where the action is. And so as soon as this map was put up, every foreign ministry raced back to Mackinder's Heartland thesis from 1904, the battle for the world island in the Eurasian continent. What he predicted is not only would there be a battle over Eurasia, but the inner crescent, the rimlands he called them, is where the conflict zones will be. That is, in fact, the map we see today. And so every foreign ministry, as soon as the Belt and Route Initiative was announced in 2013, ran back to Mackinder immediately. And sure enough, that's also where we see foreign policy construction of nuclear reactors. This is what Russia is doing. And China's promised to build 30 gigawatts in the overland route. Is Russia winning these projects using LCOE, lowest cost of electricity? No. It's a geopolitical approach, all these places. I'll start to wrap up here now, Ganapati, but when we analyzed how these deals are getting done, unlike what we see in the United States, the overwhelming structure was a national owner of the plant with a national vendor like EDF or Rosatom or self-build, which is often the case here in India. So the US model is the exception. Japan somewhat also. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the next 3 minutes to make an experiment and give you the shift, the framework that will enable you to understand the turmoil we're facing now. So back 20 years ago, this is a 900-page book boiled down to 4 slides by Philip Bobbitt. He's one of the premier constitutional scholars in the United States. Who was he? He was the nephew of our president, LBJ, in the 60s. Went on to become a premier constitutional scholar. What he said, rather strikingly 20 years ago, was that what we are going to see is that nation states are going to alter their very nature going forward. That's going to affect how we negotiate the financing structures for this next wave of nuclear. Who are the parties at the negotiation? And what he boldly asserted is that the nation states with strained finance, remember I said that IMF chief said we're now in a situation of strained or stressed sovereigns when it comes to finance. So they're going to be forced to make the shift to a new structure of market states. It's a new category where governments seek to enable rather than provide. So instead of money coming out of a national budget, it's more about regulation and public-private partnerships and negotiation rather than by edict. The further diagnosis that he made was very important in terms of analyzing the negotiation space. He said what we see is 3 personalities of these market states emerging, not fully formed yet. Mercantile market states, which is the dominant form in Asia, export-oriented. Korea, Japan, China are certainly in this mold. India is a hybrid. You can be a hybrid personality of these 3 types. Europe is where we see managerial market states. Terry, we would call this dirigisme, the government having a much stronger role in how the economy is going to unfold. And so he called that a managerial market state where the labor unions are much more involved in the governance of the country. The US, Canada, the UK to some degree, another hybrid example. And I assert India. India has a very strong entrepreneurial personality. So it's a hybrid form of market state. Some of that is the different kinds of cultures you have here, including the British tradition. So these were very insightful ways to look at the negotiation going forward of how are you going to raise the capital. I highlight this again because the sovereign governments cannot do this by themselves. So this is the difference then between a nation state and a market state. This is summarized for you to show the differences. So the nation state is much more of a provider. The market state is more limited, which is what the debate is in the United States, limiting government function. To some degree, that's being forced in the UK now and elsewhere in Europe. And these are the different personality attributes. So you can study this later. You'll have the slides of the 3 different market state types and how it affects how they approach a negotiation for a public-private partnership. That's why this framework is useful for American business people, Indian business people, policymakers. You can better understand the kind of government and the options by looking at this framework. And then we're seeing 3 different kinds of strategies for these 3 different kinds of states. And the strategies are now shifting from rollback of nuclear up into renaissance. All right, so I'm going to close with this, Ganapati. So at the end of our analysis, we said, okay, we're going to look at how nuclear is owned. And so back a couple years ago in 2020, we just laid out how nuclear is owned. And so at the top left, government owned, and then the horizontal axis is how many reactors you're operating, your capacity, okay? So we can see there, Terry, that EDF is the only entity in the upper right, which is 60 gigawatts of capacity, but it's government owned. Whereas in the United States, the small green circles there, we don't have a national monopoly. These are smaller entities operating fewer reactors, but we may see some consolidation. Korea is a hybrid, and Ganapati, you reminded me that NTPC is also a hybrid of sorts, 51% owned by the government, not fully owned by the government, so maybe has some flexibility there. So what's interesting is that we didn't find anything in the lower right. There were no large, really large, 40, 50 megawatt, privately held utilities. Now, NTPC might be able to get there with 51% ownership, but your structure is actually pretty useful right now, I would assert. So here's the wrap up. Going forward then to 2030, mindful of the new announcement here by India, is you're going to see immediately how much China is building. See, China went from the upper left to the upper right there. Again, government owned. You can see the big shift there. Data centers and commercial SMRs will be joint ventures, not government hierarchies. They are fundamentally going to be manifestations of what we call that market state. There could be as much as 400 gigawatts globally of these kinds of commercial ventures. So then, India has a new mission. Build more, get to 100 gigawatts, but here's my punchline, Ganapati. Some of that can be in joint ventures, industrial applications, data centers, not government owned. NTPC could be a major player, a catalyst, a part equity owner. There are different ways to think about this now than what you currently have. Could be very catalytic. The United States needs to do some of the same to migrate to this space. And we're going to hear from Everett and Tim about SMRs, but the scale that Everett and Oklo and some of the other SMR vendors are talking about now will move us into this empty lower right quadrant of commercial opportunity, away from the models of the 20th century. So my punchline in ending, Ganapati, is India, US, mega opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for such a illuminating and painting the real energy situation for the world and how nuclear can fill this gap. Thank you very much. But I just want to ask you one quick question about the discussion points here. I know that you did your homework.
Yeah.
Is this 100 gigawatt is too little, too small, or what do you say about it?
Okay. I have a special way to do this. Oops. Can I go back to my presentation? Thank you. Just go to slide form, yeah. Okay, 100 gigawatts. How do you throw it to the screen? Ah, here we go, okay. A decent start, Ganapati, as a minimum. As a minimum, because of all the challenges that we talked about. Development of 5 SMRs indigenously by 2033. Are you kidding? 50 is the number we wanted. It's laughably small if you consider industrial and commercial applications in data centers. And I want to hear more from Everett and Tim on that, and then Terry about Newark. That's my assertion. I hope some disagree. 2.3 billion, you have to attract external capital, or you won't get there. So that's going to require the new structures that we talked about. A roadmap, any foreign vendors allowed. Any foreign vendors allowed. I would love to hear NTPC talk about this. That's how you're going to attract some of the capital. It's a big challenge for India. And I would assert, focus on export industries first for your applications. Export industries first. Chemicals, steel, aluminum, ammonia, things you can export. That's how I think India is going to attract the capital. You're a low-cost producer in many sectors. So this international collaboration and best practices, number 8, how will India strike these partnerships? I think that's the biggest challenge on the table. Thorium reactors, go beat China. We're rooting for you.
So we will discuss
Yeah.
at the end of the presentations in detail. Next, I would like to invite, let's see, Tim Head from Evelyn Christian University, where they are building the first molten salt reactor in the United States after a gap of 50, 60 years now. So that's the way to go, Tim. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I would like to start by thanking the organizers of the conference and in particular this session for inviting me to present and get to tell you a little bit about what we're doing. So today I'll give you a preview of what's possible and hope that you can see that nuclear doesn't have to move slow. It has a reputation for doing that, but it can move faster than maybe you think it can. And SMRs are a huge opportunity in the future. And so thanks to Andrew for giving us a good introduction to the sort of global landscape of things. I'll just give you a quick outline of what I want to talk about today. And so I'll start with what are the world's most critical needs and how can we address those, and then talk a little bit about who ACU is and Next Lab and where I come from, and then talk about our plans for this molten salt reactor and the next steps that we need to be able to deploy that, and then we'll talk about how that might fit into a framework for India. So critical needs, I'm going to go through some of these quickly, but cancer is something that we all are familiar with, and it's devastating to people. Over half the people in the world will have cancer at some point in their lives, and so this is something that is a need for people in the world. Second, clean water. a third of the world needs clean water and doesn't have it for sanitation, but it's also a big issue in developed countries. Even in Texas, we talk all the time about how can we secure enough clean water for our cities to drink. This is a huge issue that needs to be solved. Recently, I was shown this article from UNICEF from a few years back saying 200 million hours a day are spent by women and girls to haul water. Wow. That's a lot of time and effort that people are spending that could be spent doing better things. Just imagine what we could do with all the power that these women and girls are using if we could just give them a little bit more energy. As you know, energy also correlates with quality of life. And if you can give people just a little bit of energy, it really improves their quality of life. Just like those women and girls who have to haul water, if you can give them enough energy to pump the water where they need it, then that really improves their life. It's not just in developing countries, though. If you go to Texas, so this is actually a graph from a few years ago. Even in Texas, we in 2010 were projecting energy shortfalls as soon as 2030. Some of those were mitigated by installing renewable energy sources, but we had problems with those renewable energy sources, just like Andrew pointed out before. With Storm Uri a few years ago, we had many people die in Texas because power went out during a cold snap and people froze to death. And so we have to come up with better ways to solve these energy problems. Nuclear can do that. And we also need to not just have more energy, but we need more cleaner energy. And so we want to reduce CO2 emissions while we increase the amount of energy production that we have. And so you've all seen these before. Obviously, fossil fuels emit lots of carbon. We go way down to the right-hand side of that, and nuclear is one of the cleanest technologies there is. So back to the Texas, and I use this because I had the data handy, but this is all across the world. Power companies are pledging to reduce their carbon emissions. And so by 2050, power companies have pledged to reduce carbon emissions to about a factor of 10 of what they are now. And that means we have to replace that with something. It needs to be reliable so that we don't have people freezing to death. So that means we need people to replace that with nuclear energy. And so that means that's just to get back to even. And so we need more than a factor of 10 increase in what we're supplying currently, and that needs to be nuclear energy. I think that molten salt reactors, so we've seen these critical needs that the world has. Molten salt reactors have a way to solve all of these three major needs. They're safe, they're clean, they're efficient, they have multiple functions, and they can be scaled and potentially built in factories and deployed in that type of model. They're carbon-free and reliable. And so molten salt reactors work in the same way that any other reactor or power plant does. It creates heat, and that heat is transferred through a heat exchanger to water. The water boils and creates steam, and you turn a turbine. So molten salt reactors, because of some of their properties, I think are an ideal solution to many of these problems. I'm sure Everett will tell us some other alternatives in a moment, but there are lots of good alternatives here, and almost all of them involve nuclear just because the power density of nuclear is so high. And so if we want to solve problems for millions and millions of people and billions of people, we need high power density energy sources. Molten salt reactors can create inexpensive, clean energy, and that's reduced because of the ability to build those in a factory, and the safety case for those does not require as much of the construction as a typical light water reactor. Additionally, molten salt reactors give you a chance to access fission products from the uranium fission, and that allows you to pull out specific isotopes that can help cure cancer or help in therapeutic diagnostics. So how is all this possible with molten salt? So in particular, there are two key things that enable these solutions. One is molten salt cooling. And so molten salt cooling is important because it lets us work at much higher temperatures and much lower pressures. So typical light water reactors work at pressures that are thousands of PSI. And that means that if a leak happens or anything, water flashes to steam, and that goes everywhere. And so we have these big containment structures to contain that if anything ever goes wrong. With molten salt reactors, the boiling point of molten salt is beyond the melting point of the materials that we use for the pipes. And so you're never going to get to a boiling transition, and so the pressures can remain low. So we can work at pressures that are similar to the pressure you would have in your water faucet and not thousands of PSI. Those high temperatures also improve efficiency for the reactors. The higher temperature you can work at, the more efficiently you can work. This also gives us opportunities for industrial applications. So as Andrew alluded to earlier, making ammonia, doing things behind the grid, those are all important things that also release carbon, and we can fix those by applying molten salt reactors because we have much higher temperature heat, and that is more easily applicable to things like making hydrogen and making ammonia and those kind of applications. So the low pressure gives us an enhanced safety case and means that instead of if there's a leak in a molten salt reactor, you don't get things spraying everywhere. You still have a mess that you have to clean up, but it's a localized mess. And so it's not going to go around the world. It's going to drip into the bottom of a pan, and it'll be there to clean up and won't contaminate the area around it. I talked briefly about access to medical isotopes. So this is the second key thing for molten salt reactors, is that the fuel is mixed into the coolant salt. And so that does a couple of things for us. One, it gives us the access to those fission products for medical purposes. And two, it lets us burn all of the fuel. And so in current light water reactors, we burn 3 to 5% of the fuel and then call that fuel rod used, and that becomes high-level nuclear waste. With a molten salt reactor, because there are no fuel rods, we don't have to worry about the stability of those fuel pellets anymore, and we can burn all of the waste, what would be waste, we can burn all of the fuel in the reactor. And so it significantly reduces the amount of unused fuel that ends up becoming waste. So let me switch gears and talk to you specifically about ACU and our project, and then we'll talk about how that can potentially impact India. So ACU is a small university. It's private, located about 200 miles or two and a half hours, let's say, drive west of Dallas-Fort Worth in Texas. We have about 6,000 students on campus and are a primarily undergraduate university. We've been recognized nationally for our teaching and research work with undergraduate students. As part of that research work, one of the drivers behind some of that is our Nuclear Energy Experimental Testing Lab. So our mission at the next lab is to provide solutions to the world's need for water, medical isotopes, and energy by advancing molten salt reactor technologies and, importantly, training the workforce to man those reactors when they come on. So Next Lab started back in about 2017. We were a small group, a few faculty and staff, and we, at that time, we were trying to advance molten salt technology. We thought this was a good idea, and so we built a salt loop. And you can see parts of that behind the group there. In 2018, the US Department of Energy heard about what we were doing and gave us a visit. And they came and they saw what we were doing and said, well, this is great work. How are you going to get from a small molten salt loop to a reactor that's going to impact the world's problems? Or multiple reactors that are going to impact the world's problems. And so in 2019, we sent a delegation to Washington, D.C. to visit with the DOE and presented a plan there to make a molten salt research reactor in 5 years. And so we said we'd do this as a first step toward this bigger goal of deploying these reactors worldwide and helping people with them. And so the DOE said, great, so when does that 5 years start? And we said, as soon as you help us with fuel and salt for the reactor. And so in particular, DOE said, great, that sounds good. And we struggled for about a year before they could write that down. And finally, we got a written commitment from Department of Energy, as well as support from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission as we engaged them in pre-application licensing, and the state of Texas and the city of Abilene where the reactor will be placed. So we have support all up and down our government for this. And at that point, we said, well, how is this going to be funded? And so when we went to DOE, we said, we're going to fund this project privately. And so Doug Robison, who had donated initially to ACU to start our project, he stood up Natura Resources as a way to not just fund our project, but move the ball down the road in terms of deploying reactors commercially. And so looking to that dream of blessing the world with this technology, we need a company that can make this sustainable and make it live in the market. And so Natura Resources has put together financing for this, and to this time, they are the main financing behind our project. Oh, what did I do? So ACU isn't doing this alone. Once Natura was stood up, we brought together a consortium of other universities. So in particular, University of Texas, Texas A&M, and Georgia Tech are partnering us in the Natura Resources Research Alliance to design and build this reactor. And our team keeps growing. So the picture here was the faculty and staff back in 21, and this is a picture in 2024 of faculty, staff, and students at ACU that are working on this project. So this molten salt thing, you may wonder, is this just crazy? Why would we use molten salt to cool something? And so it's not crazy. It turns out back in the 1960s, the Oak Ridge National Lab built and operated a molten salt reactor for 5 years. And it ran very well and was very reliable, and it ran on two types of fuel. It ran on U-235 and U-233, and successfully for both of those. And so our challenge in building a new molten salt reactor is that when the MSRE operated, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was not around. And so they have not licensed anything but a light water reactor before. And so what we did is we tried to make it easy for the NRC to license this reactor. And so we took many of the concepts from the MSRE, in particular similar salt, using lithium fluoride, beryllium fluoride with uranium fluoride mixed in, a loop design, graphite moderator. We're using a drain tank with low pressure, and we simplified some things. So in particular, we went from high enriched uranium down to HALEU as the fuel, and we reduced the thermal output to 1 megawatt. We plan to use stainless steel 316 construction because it's qualified, and it takes a very long time to qualify new materials. We shut down via drain. There is no freeze plug. And our control rods in this reactor, which I'll show you in a moment, are not safety related. We can use those to change power, but we don't need those to safely shut down the reactor. There's no cooling water associated with our reactor, and it's walk-away safe. So if power goes out or anything happens, it will shut itself down automatically, and you can just walk away and it will cool off. So this is what the reactor looks like. Let me see if I can point to some things. So this is the drain tank for the reactor. So when it's not in operation, all of the salt is at the bottom here in the drain tank. When you're ready to operate, we increase the gas pressure over the salt and push the salt up into the system. This is the core of the reactor that is mostly graphite, and so this is where the fission happens. The salt is such a composition that the only place that fission happens is in the core. And so once the salt heats up in the core, it moves up into this reactor access vessel through a pump, through a heat exchanger, and then back around through the cycle again. We have lots of safety features here. And so the first barrier to release is the salt, and of course the pipes around the system. If there were to be a leak, we would catch that leak in what we call the reactor thermal management system, that it has a liner. The salt falls into the liner and cools off. There's insulation, some shielding, and then all of this is held in a gas-tight container, and to ensure that if there were a leak, any gaseous fission products are trapped inside of that gas-tight container. This is the building we'd like to install our reactor in. It's called the Science Engineering Research Center on the ACU campus. It has a large trench in the research bay. The trench is 25 feet deep, 80 feet long, and about 15 feet wide, and the reactor will fit in that trench. That building was built about a year and a half ago, and so we're on our way to getting that done. Additionally, while we were building the building, we were working with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to receive our construction permit for the reactor. Approval for that was given on September 16th of last year. And so the next steps for us are to finish the detailed design of the reactor, which will go into the operating license. And once that's complete, then we can start operation. While the NRC is reviewing the operating license, of course, we'll be building the reactor. And so we're excited to do that, and we hope to have an operating reactor sometime in 2027.
How much capital
The rumors I've heard, you can't pin me down on this, but somewhere around 100 million. So our project is moving forward, and we're on the path to becoming the first operating molten salt reactor in the United States since the MSRE. And we've moved really fast to do that. So you heard we started our work in 2017 and moved through. And hopefully by 2027 we'll be done. And so when we started, we didn't even think we were building a reactor. And I have, when we got our construction permit, we wanted to deploy something right away. And so we decided, well, we'll deploy our paper reactor now. And so this is our paper reactor going into the trench, and hopefully in a couple years we'll have a real reactor deployed in that same trench in the building. Let me just say a couple more words about Natura Resources, who funds this work. So this molten salt research reactor is acting as their demonstration reactor. And so while we're building this molten salt research reactor, they are in parallel looking at what can we do to commercialize this and moving forward in the commercialization of those opportunities. So this is a concept of theirs for a desalination and electricity producing facility that would leverage the molten salt reactor technology we're talking about. So MSRs in India. MSRs can make nuclear even safer than it already is. It's already the safest energy out there. We can make it better. MSRs have applications beside just energy, and I think that will excite people, in particular the medical aspects. Energy is very important and I think is a driver for all of this, but medical applications really tug at people's heartstrings. MSRs reduce wasted fuel. So one of the biggest issues with nuclear that you don't hear, people don't like to talk about is the waste that comes with it. With MSRs, we burn most of that waste. And so it significantly reduces that problem. Changing to small modular reactor style deployments also has the potential to reduce the financial burden needed to get something in place. If you can build the reactors in a factory and have them certified there and truck them to the deployment site, that's a great way to leverage the financial burden of all the setup that you have to do to be able to produce those reactors. Additionally, lots of small reactors are going to improve grid stability. So if one goes down here, you have enough extra capacity to switch power from one place to another. The thorium fuel cycle, I think, is an excellent thing that we should be shooting for in the future. I think we aren't quite there yet. I think molten salt reactors are a step in that direction, and I think Ganapati will tell us a little bit more about where he sees that going soon. International collaborations, yes, we need them. We need to do whatever needs to be done to make that happen, not just for the US or for India, but for the world. We need to figure out how to collaborate on these things and the peaceful collaboration and use of power to improve people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is an exciting development after about 60-year gap, and let us hope that MSRs will help the world soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, our speaker is Everett Redmond from yeah. Go ahead, Everett.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me, inviting me to come and speak here. What I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about what's happening in the United States in terms of reactor deployments. I'm with a company called Oklo, probably never heard of us. We're designing an advanced reactor, liquid sodium cooled reactor, to be deployed in the US currently, and then we'll be looking internationally a bit later. I'll talk about that in detail, but first I'm going to talk about the industry as a whole. Now, we are a publicly traded company, so I need to provide, just for legal purposes, some forward-looking statements here, so basically don't take anything I say as investment advice. So the advanced reactor industry. Large water-cooled reactors are the backbone of the nuclear power industry worldwide and in the United States currently. But advanced reactors, and when I say advanced reactors, what I really mean are non-water-cooled reactors, and I'll talk about that in more detail. They offer many innovative products in different sizes, coolants, and higher temperatures. You heard Tim talk a little bit about molten salt reactors, which will be new in terms of commercial operation, operating at higher temperatures, as he mentioned. So currently in the United States, we have 94 large light water reactors. And when I say large, I mean greater than, say, 800 megawatt electric. Those reactors were all licensed for 40 years. Actually, there's two new ones, the AP1000s from Westinghouse. Those are the youngest reactors there. But the reactors were originally licensed for 40 years. Licenses were extended out to 60 years, and many have been extended out to 80 years. So these are investments that will last for a very long time to generate electricity. What we're seeing in the United States now, too, is the restart of a couple of these large light water reactors that were shut down. Andrew kind of touched on this a little bit in his presentation, with Constellation restarting the 3 Mile Island reactor, which was shut down in 2019. The idea at that point in time was it was not economical to operate, so they closed it. They were never intending to restart it. The financial situation has changed, so now they're now looking to restart it. Now, when we talk about advanced reactors, and I borrowed a few slides from the Nuclear Energy Institute, that's why it says NEI up at the top here. This slide shows members of NEI that are advanced reactor developers. There's about 25 there. This is not all-inclusive. There are more companies in the US that are developing reactors. You see Natura Resources here that Tim mentioned, companies you're familiar with, I imagine, Holtec International, GE, Hitachi, Westinghouse, and then many companies that are probably new to you as well. These companies cover a range of sizes from the large 1,000 megawatt reactors down to couple megawatt electric, small reactors, I'll touch on that in a minute, and even one company in the bottom corner there, Zeno, is doing radioisotope thermal generators, so really kind of like small batteries, similar to what's used in space for space exploration, but they're looking to deploy those here domestically or terrestrially for various purposes. Now this slide just kind of covers the gamut here of what we're talking about when we're talking about advanced reactors. Don't take the particular locations and the particular names to, you know, they're approximations here in terms of power levels and stuff like that, and may not fully represent everybody. But we have the large water-cooled reactors over on the left, which go from typically about 20 megawatt electric with last energy up to 1,000 megawatt electric. Then we have gas-cooled, which is typically helium-cooled, using a fuel that's typically called TRISO, so very hard carbon material, and that can be either in ball size or in pellets. And then you've got multiple sizes there from 1 megawatt up. Metal cooled, liquid sodium cooled typically, though liquid lead is also being considered, and then molten salt. The thing that the metal cooled reactors and the molten salt cooled reactors have in common, as Tim mentioned, is operating close to atmospheric pressure. Huge benefit in terms of operations, maintenance, construction, and safety. Then the gas-cooled is at somewhat higher pressure, but not as high pressure as the water-cooled reactors. Now we're looking at multiple operational uses here. So you've got microreactors, small and large reactors. SMRs, small modular reactors, are typically referred to as less than 300 megawatt electric. There is no set definition for microreactor, but think about microreactors as being, say, less than 50 or less than 20 megawatt electric down to a couple megawatt electric. So typical production use of reactors is for electricity, though you're seeing conversations now about hydrogen production in the United States, process heat use, and then in terms of multiple end users, we've got data centers. I'm going to talk about that quite a bit. Maritime, there are companies looking at deploying reactors for shipping, so replacing the oil burning systems on those with reactors. There's also the floating reactors. Russia has one, and then others that are being looked at, like Thorcon. You're looking at district energy, so district heating in some European countries. And then in the United States, also petrochemical use, as well as oil and gas. So the oil and gas sector is looking to reduce carbon emissions in terms of what they're doing and using nuclear to do that. So we're seeing a huge different industry coming here for nuclear than just electricity production, or different than just large baseload centralized electricity production. What you're going to see is electricity production being done at the point of need as opposed to in large facilities. Now let's talk about some of the new customers here. And this has already been alluded to, but I want to hit it here a little bit. In the United States, we've got the Department of Defense is looking at a project called Project Pele. What they're looking at is a transportable reactor, one that would come in your standard 20-foot shipping container, set it up in about 3 days, operate it for however long you want to, and then tear it down and ship it out in about 7 days. Power level there being about 1 to 5 megawatt electric. They're going to do a demonstration out at the Idaho National Laboratory in around 2026. And then the Department of Defense is also looking at reactors for domestic military bases. So, using a reactor to power the domestic military base and then to be able to isolate from the grid if you need to. So, shut down, separate in case of an emergency, whatever that may be, and generate power there. And they're looking at microreactors or reactors, say 10 megawatt or less for that. There's a facility up in Alaska that's looking at a reactor both for electricity production as well as heat. And so you're seeing some new areas here for reactor deployments. Obviously, the U.S. Navy uses reactors for ships, aircraft carriers and submarines, but this would be using reactors for domestic bases. And in many of these cases, these would be operated by commercial entities like Oklo or others, as opposed to the military. And then we've got other customers. And so this is what you're seeing really in the United States within the last year and a half, is a huge interest and commitments from companies other than the large utilities. So Dow Chemical is teamed up with X-Energy as part of the Department of Energy's Advanced Reactor Demonstration Project to deploy the X-Energy high-temperature gas reactors for producing steam for the chemical facility down in Louisiana. Amazon is investing in X-Energy for data centers. Google and Kairos are teamed up for data centers. And then for Oklo, we're teamed up with Switch for a non-binding master power agreement for up to 12 gigawatts of power over 20 years to be deployed. Equinix made a $25 million investment in Oklo as prepayment towards power. And then we're partnered also with a company, Wyoming, well, they were called Wyoming Hyperscale, they're now called Prometheus Hyperscale, for power up in Wyoming, and then also Diamondback Energy related to the oil industry. So what you're seeing here is customers that are not your traditional just corporations or standard grid operations. You're seeing companies that want to team up for nuclear and want the power to be deployed near where they're going to be building. So in our case, we would be building close to where Switch is, or Equinix, or Diamondback Energy, or Wyoming Hyperscale. And these reactors are smaller. So one thing I didn't mention, when you're looking at X-Energy, Kairos, and Oklo, we're all less than 100 megawatt electric. So what you're seeing here are companies that want to deploy smaller reactors and deploy them out at the rate at which they're going to build out. So a data center, for example, you could have a data center that uses a total of 1 gigawatt of energy or more. They're not going to build that full data center in one shot. They're going to build it out in tranches. With our reactor, 50 megawatt electric, you can build it out in the same tranches as they're doing. So build it out as they need. So I'm going to talk about Oklo now. So our business model is unique within the industry. So we're build, own, and operate. So we're not selling the reactor. At the end of the day, we're selling electricity to our customers through a power purchase agreement. So we'll build the reactor, we'll own it, and operate it. This enables us to bring to market reactors for industries that would like to have firm, clean electricity, but don't want to own and operate a reactor. Think a data center. They're not going to want to own a reactor, let alone operate it. We come in and take care of that for them and are able to build near where they're doing it. So specific to our design, so we're a liquid sodium cooled reactor, a fast spectrum reactor. And then first reactor is going to be built at Idaho National Laboratory. It's going to be 15 megawatt electric, followed by 50 megawatt electric for deployment for the data centers. So this is a small, simple design based off of technology that was deployed at Idaho National Laboratory back in the 70s and 80s. Experimental breeder reactor 2, which operated for 30 years out there and did generate electricity. Operating temperature about 450 degrees C, higher than light water-cooled reactors, but lower than the salt reactor that Tim talked about. Inherently safe, proven technology, and small, simple design. So I emphasized this operates at close to atmospheric pressure. You cannot get the sodium hot enough to boil. So you're in a very different safety regime than you are with water-cooled reactors, which are exceptionally safe. This just brings a new level of safety to it. One of the things that we're doing too is looking at the supply chain. So with the smaller machines, you're able to deploy a lot more of them. So you'll get to nth of a kind much quicker. You'll burn down that curve very fast. And when we're looking at the supply chain, we're trying to look at non-nuclear supply chain as much as we can. So trying to take like 70% of the machine and the equipment will be from the non-nuclear supply chain, and then 30% from the conventional side nuclear. We have an agreement with Siemens Energy, for example, to do the steam generators. So using off-the-shelf equipment that they currently sell that would be deployed at all of our reactors. This is a win-win for us and for them because we're using equipment that's already designed, and for them, they get to deploy a lot of it and get that sort of arrangement with maintenance and everything that comes with it. So trying to use as much off-the-shelf equipment as possible, which is unique compared to the very large machines out there. Now, fast neutrons, why a fast reactor? Why do we like fast reactor technology? Well, the fast spectrum enables us to unlock more energy from the nuclear fuel. So we're able actually to do recycling of commercial spent nuclear fuel, which we intend to do. So we intend to recycle commercial spent nuclear fuel from, or nuclear waste if you will, from the light water reactor fleet in the United States, and then eventually recycle our own fuel. Why are we doing this? We need high-assay low-enriched uranium, which is enriched up to 19.75%. We're confident we can do recycling in the United States for cheaper than we can do fresh high-assay low-enriched uranium fuel. So it enables us, again, because we're build, own, and operate, we now control the entire fuel cycle for ourselves from beginning to end, focusing really on the front end, controlling that ourselves, and then making a contribution on the back end. Now talking about the safety case again here, and then I'll wrap up. So I mentioned the experimental breeder reactor 2. Back in the 80s, they did some experiments with it, which I doubt very seriously you could do today. They turned off the secondary side, stopped the heat rejection, so stopped the heat removal from the reactor, did not shut it down, did not insert control rods. The system heated up and then automatically shut itself down. Tim talked about that for the molten salt reactors. They can do the same thing. And this is unique compared to some of the other systems out there, certainly compared to water-cooled reactors. So there's that natural inherent physics feedback which enables the system to operate and survive situations that other machines may not be able to, which reduces then the amount of safety systems that we need, which reduces the cost to deployment and makes the whole system an easier system to deploy. I mentioned we're going to build our first reactor out at Idaho National Laboratory. So it is going to be a U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission licensed machine. It is going to be a commercial reactor. We are going to generate electricity with it and sell electricity with it. We're potentially going to sell electricity to the lab as well as to other customers out there. We are planning to build a pilot scale fuel fabrication facility out there. I shouldn't actually say planning, we're working on it now. That's a building right there at the Idaho National Laboratory, building 798 at the Materials and Fuels Complex. We are going to do fuel fabrication there for our metallic fuel using fuel actually processed from the old experimental breeder reactor 2. So the spent fuel from EBR2 is being processed by INL. They're doing it for the purpose of the disposal, getting it ready for disposal. In the process, they're creating high-assay, low-enriched uranium, which we have access to 5 metric tons of. We're unique in that sense because we already have access to 5 metric tons of HALEU compared to other advanced reactor companies which are waiting for fuel to come available for them. So we will be fabricating the fuel there, building the reactor out at the site out there, generating electricity. We plan to submit our license application to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission later this year, near the end of the year. We'll be going into what's called readiness review with NRC here very shortly, where they come in and look over parts of our application and provide some feedback on it, informal feedback that is. And then we are making great headway with the fuel fabrication facility out there. So we're in an active licensing process with that as well, but that's being done through the Department of Energy because it's within the National Laboratory. So we are in the design phase for that building, and then we'll be doing construction within that building, renovating it next year, preparing it for doing the fuel fabrication effort shortly thereafter. We anticipate startup of the reactor in 2028 out there, and then generating electricity very shortly thereafter. So one of the things I want to leave you with for a second, kind of round this out again. When looking at the advanced reactor industry and looking at the size of the machines here that you're talking about, we are seeing now a whole new different sector for interest in nuclear. Yes, it's still electricity generation, but it's not your large utilities. It's end customers like Switch, like Google, like Amazon, like Diamondback Energy that want to have power generated near their site. So data centers, that demand has gone through the roof within the last year and a half. I mean, it was significant before artificial intelligence took off, and since AI has taken off, it's increased even more so. Oil and gas is a big sector that's looking at this as well. I mentioned Diamondback Energy for us. There's been conversations up in Canada with the oil sands up there looking to decarbonize that area as well. They haven't progressed yet to nuclear, but they're having conversations about it. So you're seeing nuclear come into different areas where you're going to deploy it there. Real estate, interesting idea here. What you're seeing is potential planned communities. So an area where a company wants to come in and build a large community there for citizens to live, and they want to have their own power. Maybe a microgrid, or be connected to the larger grid, but have that ability to separate from the grid if needed and have their own resilience. I mentioned that for the Defense Department as well. And then, of course, there is still the base load for utilities. So in the United States, you are seeing utilities look at some of the larger machines, like the BWRX-300, a 300 megawatt electric. Same with TerraPower with their natrium liquid sodium cooled reactor, similar to ours, but 300 plus megawatt electric deployed with the utility. So you do have some of the standard utilities interested, but the thing that's really taken off is the alternate customers that still want electricity, but want to buy it directly. And there's some great opportunities here with the smaller machines like ours to deploy them next to the customer and bring that to it. The image there on the right, which I have here as well, is a representation, artist representation of what our reactor is going to look like. We're trying to design it so that it doesn't look like your standard reactor, so it's more appealing. I wish I could tell you that as Idaho, the state of Idaho, it's not. The state of Idaho is a little bit more flat than that, but we have the opportunity to deploy in great locations. So that's it. Want to wrap it up with that. I should have said one of the things too, I mentioned reactor, but we actually refer to it as the Aurora powerhouse. Why do I refer to it as a powerhouse? Again, because at the end of the day, we're not selling the reactor, we're selling power. So you're seeing new business models come along too. And with that, be happy to take questions or conversation at a later time. Thank you.
Right, would you mind please explaining to us the name of Oklo, origins of Oklo?
Sorry, the origins for Oklo? So the origins for Oklo, there is a natural occurring reactor that is natural occurring in the ground where you get some water added and you get a reactor, reactions occur, fission reactions occur. It's called Oklo. That's what our founders decided to follow along with us as well. Our co-founders liked that concept and went with the name Oklo as well.